Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Preserving Foster Youth Benefits webinar today. My name is Kendall. I'm Vice President of Policy at the Center for the Rights of Abused Children. We're delighted to have you here today and excited for you to meet our guests and learn from them firsthand what it took to kind of pass this law, but more importantly, what it looks like after implementation and how to do that well. So to get started today, I'll give you a brief background, just high-level thoughts. You're going to hear from a special guest, and then we're going to get into the Q&A, hopefully provide a lot of time for that, for folks to ask the questions on their mind. So let's get started. For those of you who aren't familiar with the center, we're just over 5 years old. Our mission to protect children, change laws, and inspire people. And we do that all across America and in Washington, D.C. So just some high-level background information about the preservation of youth benefits. This practice, sometimes referred to as benefit mining, state child welfare agencies routinely apply for benefits, screen youth for any number of benefits. It could be Social Security, it could be veteran survivor, it could be child support. And they take those funds and place them in the state budget to cover the cost of care for the youth. At its height, 42 states, 251 million, took that third-party income, and that included child support funds. When we think about Social Security and veteran survivor benefits, it's closer to around maybe $161 million. But overall, those benefits account for a small slither of child welfare agencies' budgets. In particular, Social Security and veteran benefits cover only 3% of their budget. In Arizona, an estimated 10 to 20% at the time of children qualified for federal Social Security, disability, and veteran survivor benefits. But prior to this change, most of them never knew the state was applying for these benefits on their behalf or was taking their money. And what it amounted to is an approximately $6 million in federal benefits that was taken from these children and used to defray their cost of care. Our model reform here in Arizona passed this summer and was signed into law by Governor Hobbs. DCS will continue to screen for eligibility through their third-party vendor and apply for federal benefits. However, it's now required to collaborate with children and the child's attorney to find a fiduciary to manage the funds, and that goes until the child turns 18. If DCS, of course, is acting as a fiduciary, it requires them to conserve the funds for the child's benefit in a savings or trust account, while still permitting DCS to spend the funds in the child's best interest when there are costs the agency is not required to otherwise cover. So anything above not only maintenance costs, but special allowances, that would be funds that the child could then access to cover things that they may need. Also important to this is DCS is required to provide an annual report to increase transparency and accountability. And you'll see on this screen various aspects of our model reform here in Arizona. And significantly, yesterday, the center released a preservation of a foster youth benefits toolkit. It has essentially the game plan for how we advance this legislation in Arizona, and hopefully you'll pick it up and run with it in your state, and bring this reform home for foster youth in your community. So on this slide, you're going to see just some high-level thoughts on implementation that the center, and along with our stakeholders, Drew Schaefer with the Morse Institute for Justice, and Ann Ronan, Arizona Center for Law and the Public Interest, who joins us today. Just a real pleasure to work with them on this, on the implementation aspects of it. It really took all of us thinking through all the challenges to implementation, and most importantly, working with the department. We're grateful for the leadership of David Lujan, the director, as we thought through kind of what us anticipated some of the implementation challenges. I think it starts with, and it's the number one prong there, and it's what we're going to be doing today, but engaging youth in care, former youth in care, and listening to them. And I know Marissa Pike, who will be joining us, will share some of her experiences of foster youth, but I know Ann Ronan in particular did some significant outreach and listening to folks. But there were other aspects of implementation, I think, that were really important, and that has to do with immediately ending the use of this benefit mining, and to begin that accounting for the benefits. And Director Lujan really led the charge in that by putting a stop to that practice effective in July. Didn't have to do that. He could have waited till November. But what that means is that, for some of these youth, it's $900 a month. They gain 4 extra months of benefits in their accounts because of that leadership. And I know we're all grateful for that. Some of the aspects of this, just high level, is to think about the high rate kind of when it comes to foster youth with special needs, that screening that happens on an ongoing basis. But what the follow-up that doesn't always happen is the screenings for benefits on the other side. So that was one aspect of the conversation that we really wanted to think through. Also determining the best benefit match, defining what an unmet need is for foster youth, thinking about financial counseling, and of course, staff training. So these were some of the aspects of stakeholder feedback when it came to implementing the law here in Arizona. It's not just that there's going to be a vendor for a period of time in Arizona working on kind of jump-starting the conversation and field staff involvement, but hopefully on an ongoing basis, DCS, our child welfare agency here, kind of takes the lead in ensuring all the processes are implemented as required. And I think overall, one of the big features that we heard from foster youth, but I think just recognize in any bureaucracy, no matter how well-intentioned it may be, is that we want to be responsive to foster youth. We don't want to be caught up in a lot of bureaucracy when they have a need today. But we also want a proper, due process concerns and safeguards in place and a thoughtful, nuanced policy. And so that is really we weighed in quite a bit on that front, thinking about what that process is going to look like. And then finally, what are the appropriate notices in plain English of this new law? Make it easily understandable for everyone so folks can know what their resources are and what their rights are. Before I turn it over to Marissa, I just wanted to kind of contextualize this a little bit. This law is actually part of a national movement. Cities like New York, Philadelphia, Washington, D.C. already prohibiting this practice. Our good colleagues over at the Children's Advocacy Institute have been doing this for a number of years, kind of investing in that conversation. But Arizona was the first state to pass a comprehensive reform. Shortly thereafter, New Mexico joined states prohibiting the practice through administrative action. Oregon passed a law. There's numerous other states that have pending legislation. And I think this is a real significant thing. Congress has had a chance to do something about this since 2007. That was the first year a reform was introduced. And yet we haven't seen any action. And I think that's what's so significant to me about this stakeholder group and about what Arizona did is they took action. They're getting results and demonstrating what leadership looks like for foster youth on this issue. Let me introduce you to Marissa. Marissa Pike, former foster youth, is now a foster care advocate who speaks about her experience with the Department of Children and Families in Massachusetts. She recently testified on their pending legislation. She now works the 911 system as an EMT, and in her spare time, she focuses on policy reform that affects marginalized communities. In addition, Marissa is a newly licensed foster parent and uses her time in care to connect with kids and give them a sense of relatability. I think you're just going to love hearing from her. She has a wonderful story, an incredible story about resiliency. So Marissa, turn it over to you.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for allowing me to be here today. Allow me to introduce myself again. My name is Marissa Pike, and I currently reside in Massachusetts. As you all heard, I represent the individuals directly impacted by this practice. I aged out of the foster care system almost 4 years ago after spending 10 years in care. Originally removed from my mother for suspected abuse and neglect, I have many grievances with the Department of Children and Families, but I am here to speak today about the fact that my Social Security benefits were taken from me for over 6 years without my knowledge. I was not made aware of these benefits until I was 18 years old and homeless on the street. A desperate outcry to the state's welfare office started a discussion regarding these benefits I knew nothing about. Imagine being 18 years old with no family, no place to go, but knowing the Department of Children and Families had taken over $60,000 from me. And Unfortunately, that day at the welfare office only helped me get those benefits in my name. For 6 months, I rode the bus. I rode the bus until the end of the night, satisfied my hunger with foods found at the convenience store, but also called the department begging for help. Each call ended with a "we're working on it." As I struggled to provide the most basic needs for myself, I could not help but question the meaning of life. The department stood back as they watched this newly 18-year-old struggle through adulthood like a fish out of water, completely forgetting that they had taken money that was supposed to improve my quality of life. Someone may ask, what would I have done at 18 with almost $60,000? I would have used that money to secure some type of housing prior to my 18th birthday. I would have had a financial cushion without having to count every penny at the bottom of my backpack. During this time, I was still in high school. Rather than applying for colleges, I was trying to figure out how I was going to commute 2 hours to and from school each day. I would have done things like invested in my future or got my license or even possibly a vehicle. Today, as Kendall stated, I work the North Shore 911 system and I drive ambulances. I did go to college. I graduated with my associates in early childhood education and a bachelor's in criminal justice. And I am currently working on a bachelor's in nursing with the end goal to become a nurse practitioner. Recently, I became licensed as a foster parent. I currently serve children ages 6 to 18, and I'm often asked, how did I get to this point in my life? And the best way I can answer that question is when you spend a lot of time at the end of the night when the world is quiet, you do a lot of reflecting. I was beyond angry with my life and my situation, but something inside me drove me to change my situation. I can't change my story. I can't change the things that I've been through, but I can change the outcome of for the children entering the system today and tomorrow. So that is why I'm here today to tell you my story. Thank you for listening to me.
Wow, Marissa. Thank you. I know it takes a lot of energy to share your story with audience, and we're just so grateful for you and for your willingness to stand up, not only for yourself, but for all those foster youth who currently are being denied the supports that you were denied. So thank you for that. So don't worry, everyone. Marissa will be back at the Q&A at the end to field your questions, but I want to pivot a little bit to our panel, give a brief introduction, bios for everyone, and then we'll get into some Q&A. We're joined today by David Lujan, Department of Child Safety here in Arizona CEO. He brings over 2 decades of child welfare advocacy experience to the department. He assumed this position in April of 2023. He's an attorney, earned his JD from the Sandra Day O'Connor College of Law at ASU. His legal career included working as an Arizona Assistant AG, the staff attorney for the Arizona State Senate Judiciary Committee. And he served in public office starting in 2004, so state representative from 2004 to 2010, Senate from 2011 to 2013. More recently, he joined the Children's Action Alliance in 2017, to launch its affiliate, the Arizona Center for Economic Progress, and serve as first executive director. He became president and CEO of the Alliance in November of 2020. Also today, we're joined by Ann Ronan. She's been practicing the area of health law for the poor and uninsured since graduating also from ASU in 1979. She worked with community legal services for 11 years with an emphasis on representing low-income individuals. She worked for the Arizona Center of Disability Law for 13 years, and during that time, she's representing children and adults with disabilities and obtaining necessary and appropriate medical and mental health services. She's now employed with the Arizona Center for Law and the Public Interest. She currently works with families to ensure children receive necessary treatment from both public and private insurance programs. And finally today, certainly not least, Drew Schaefer, Executive Director of the William E. Morris Institute for Justice, or MIJ, where he's worked since November 2021 with a small but mighty team of attorneys to advocate on behalf of economically vulnerable Arizonans and other Arizonans in historically marginalized communities. And their focus there is to address systemic problems affecting their economic and food security, healthcare, housing stability, and safety, and also securing other basic civil rights. Drew was a civil legal aid attorney for 15 years in Minneapolis, Minnesota. There, before joining MIJ, I have a place in my heart for legal aid societies. That's where I started my career. So I felt kindred spirits when we got together and started working on this issue, and I'm really honored to share in this conversation with you today. So thanks everyone for joining us. like to get started. Bit of a softball question maybe, but I always want to know um, why why does this issue, preserving youth benefits, why does it matter to you? And I would like maybe for the director to comment first on that.
Sure. Thank you, Kendall. Hi, everyone. As Kendall mentioned, I was appointed to my role in April of this year. And at the time this legislation was going through at the state capitol, I was the CEO of Children's Action Alliance, and we were advocating regarding this bill. And to me, it's important because just children who are going through the foster care system need to have the financial supports when they age out. And as we've heard from Marissa earlier, you hear how important it is to establishing sort of the sound financial footing when they exit the foster care system, or to provide supports as needed while they're in the foster care system to help towards permanency. So I think it just is so critically important. For here in Arizona, the benefits that were seized amount to about $4 to $6 million per year. We have a $1.4 billion budget at DCS in Arizona, so it's a relatively small amount. And I think it just makes sense. It's a good policy. It's one that probably should have happened a long time ago, and I think it's the right thing to do.
Yeah, and Drew, why do you care about this issue? Oh, Anne, I think you're muted.
I think one of the reasons why it's critical is really kind of because of our foster care system is so inadequate, and in many ways, and it has been, I think, for a long time. And those of us that advocate for reform know that children in care, while in care, don't receive all that they need, and sometimes it's essential things, not just they don't get fancy dancy bikes or something. They don't get the technology that the rest of the kids in the world get that are critical for their education. And so allowing a child to have available to them the same sort of benefit that a child who's not in care would have from these benefits is such an important equalizing step. But as David mentioned, kids who leave foster care as adults with no family are in desperate situations, and they don't need to be, when these funds could have been preserved and planned for their transition into adulthood. So it's a way that, what I think of is to sort of acknowledge the weaknesses in the system and put some sort of plugs in the dike, so to speak, to help those kids who have the benefit. So that's why I care about it.
Okay, thank you. And just as a reminder for our audience, you can ask questions at any time. There should be a button at the bottom of your screen that says Q&A. Feel free to tap that, put your question in, and we'll get to those here after a bit. Drew, you're next.
Thanks, Kendall. At the William E. Morris Institute for Justice, we always take special interest in issues where there are broken systems causing harm to people, and doing so in sort of a thoughtless, needless way as systems operate and affect people's lives. And, working with my team, Brenda Munoz-Furnish and MJ Simpson here, we started looking at this issue. Brenda actually surfaced the issue in spring of 2022. There had been public reporting about this, and we delved into the history of, how foster youth benefits mining started, and the decades of evolution of this problem, where systems all over the country found the same solution to essentially what they would view as revenue maximization strategies, and using these critical benefits from a really vulnerable group of people to essentially shore up their budgets. And they were doing so without telling kids about it. They were taking a property interest that was protected constitutionally. And whenever an issue like that happens, it's of concern to us. We've done some work on ensuring that foster youth have health care in the former foster care youth coverage category after they reach the age of 18, protecting the benefits and property interests of foster youth is something that's really important to us at MIJ. And that's really how our interest in this issue started.
Yes, that's a really good frame for it, Drew. I mean, it to me raises another aspect of it, and I'm gonna ask the director this, like, to what extent, because you're talking about systems, to what extent have you seen implementation of House Bill 2559, that was the bill in Arizona? Is it changing how the system responds at all, in your opinion? If so, why or how has that happened?
I think it's a little bit early yet since it just has recently gone into effect, but I expect it probably will. Here in Arizona, as has been mentioned, for this first initial year, we've contracted with a firm to help us manage the personal needs accounts that will be set up under this new process. And I think, eventually, after this first year, we really are going to want to have a really emboldened unit within DCS to help manage this. And I think as we really get into this, I think you are going to see it change. I think one thing that I would like to see happen is us setting goals here internally for how we are able to achieve benefits for disability benefits for youth in care. We don't measure that now internally, and you can't really see if you're making a difference until you actually measure it. And so I think I think we want to put in things to make sure that we are changing the way that this is approached so that it is providing the maximum benefit for youth that are in foster care going forward.
Yeah, and I know Anne in particular, kind of with disabled youth and in our conversations and stakeholder feedback, you kind of really help focus us a little bit on that aspect of the conversation and the screenings. I don't know if you might want to share with folks, why you felt so passionately about that and why that's important.
Okay, I mean, I think part of what I saw as a real opportunity here was to solve another problem that foster youth have, which is that a great many children who enter foster care enter with certain disabilities right from the get-go. Maybe they've had some issues in their birth, process or in utero, but they start off with disabilities, and had they been with caring parents, they would have been evaluated and assessed and probably enrolled in significant and early intervention services that would help eliminate and reduce their disability as adults. But because the motivation for trying to get a child on Social Security was more financial than really sort of the benefit that getting SSI or disability benefits might bring to the child long term, I don't think the department was looking at it that way. And so I think the idea that they have to really aggressively review every year whether a child now might be eligible, they have to address it initially when the child comes in, but then they have to constantly review whether the child might be eligible for disability benefit is critical. We see kids in their grade school age, teenage, who've never been assessed for disability services at all. And they're struggling. I mean, they're mischaracterized in their special education classes, and they're not getting basic services that could affect their ability to function in life because they've never been identified. This is going to really require the department, like David said, to seriously look at setting a standard for how many children should we actually be identifying and enrolling. And there are some numbers out there that suggest somewhere around 20% of the children in care may be eligible for a disability benefit. And we're way below that in Arizona right now, percentage-wise. And once those kids get that benefit, generally speaking, it stays with them for life. And so when they leave care, they will have not only a financial benefit, but a medical insurance benefit and all that comes with that. So it strikes me that we're sort of going to say kill two birds with one stone. We're going to solve another problem and get these kids identified and get them the services they need so that their time in care doesn't make them further behind because of their disability.
And again, that's no small lift. It's an important lift. And I think that just speaks to kind of the thought process as one aspect of it. Another aspect of the conversation in terms of how the stakeholder group tackle challenges. I know, Drew, we talked about existing policies and procedures, potential conflicts and pathways, maybe if there's an unmet need and cost of care and how we best do that. I don't know if you might want to talk at all about some aspects of that conversation.
Yeah, thanks again, Kendall. I just think the most important thing to reflect on when we talk about House Bill 2559 and this new law and this great new tool that Arizona has. And, let's reflect on just how incredible it is that we accomplished this here in Arizona. And under the leadership of Director Lujan, the department has embraced this reform and has stopped the practice that, led to this new. And the reason I think that this is so important to celebrate is we heard from Marissa. She described an incredible story about her experience. And I think about how different things could have been for her if this law had been in place when she entered the department's care. And that's really what this law does, responsive, Kendall, to your question. This law focuses all the energy of the department on the best interests of the children that are in the department's care. It's not going to be about, counting beans for how we're going to, cover the several $1 million out of a $1 billion plus annual budget. It's going to be about what matters most. What are the needs of the child? What are the tools that the child can carry forward in their lives? Financial literacy training, understanding about, financial resources and how to invest them in their lives now to meet their needs in activities at school or future goals like Marissa mentioned, having a home when they reach adulthood and exit care, having transportation and the ability to live and work in the neighborhoods and communities of their choices. And that's really what I think is, the most incredible thing that we should really focus on with this law is that this is all about turning energies towards the best in children that are in the department.
You're highlighting, that departmental shift. I know the director shared about, they have a vendor who's kind of working initially on the implementation of it. Director Lujan, I know we get a lot of questions about how the funding for administering this program is going to work. I mean, we saw Title IV funds, ostensibly should be able to be pulled down to administer this program. And I don't know if you want to speak at all to that kind of aspect of it. And I think as we met one day and the next day, there's a letter or something drops from Social Security Administration and HHS that didn't really say much, and by my estimation, but there's a letter out there. If you want to talk about that.
Yeah, I think we are still looking at how we can draw down 40 funds to help fund and administer this. It, as has been mentioned, I mean, the benefits that we were seizing over years was about $4 to $6 million per year. And in a $1.4 billion budget, that's a relatively small amount. But we still, for us, and that's a still amount that we would ask our legislature here to help replace that funding. Whether that happens or not, we'll have to see. But I think it's still important for us to be able to find additional federal funds, if possible, to help to administer this, because we have a lot of things we need to be able to tackle here, and pretty limited resources. So we want to be able to draw down the federal dollars wherever we can. So that'll be a big focus going forward.
What were some of the obstacles? I know our listeners are probably curious from your kind of firsthand experience. What are some of the obstacles maybe you have experienced, are experiencing with implementation, or opportunities?
Yeah, well, I think first it's just implementing the policies around this and making sure that we get it right. I think there's a little bit of pressure being the first state to do this on a statewide basis. We want to make sure that we implement the policies in the right way. So all of us who are on this, we met back in this past summer after the legislation was signed by the governor, and really appreciated the input we had from everybody that's on this panel. And I think we are working and want to continue to work with everybody who's involved with this to make sure that we get those policies right. And then once we do that, it's going out and educating our staff, educating and building up that unit that we talked about, so that when this third-party vendor, goes away after a year, that we're able to kind of stand alone and administer this effectively. And then I think it's educating the community on how this is going to work going forward. As soon as we get these policies implemented here in the coming weeks, we want to do webinars with our community, with children's attorneys, with others who care foster parents and others, so that they're aware of how we're going to be administering this program, how it's going to work going forward, so that everybody's on the same page. The other thing I'll mention too, I think the timing of this is good in Arizona, in that this month we are also initiating a new program for extended foster care for youth who are aging out of the system, where all youth who are aging out will get what we call a success coach, which is sort of an ongoing case manager while they are in extended foster care. And I think having these funds now available and pairing that with financial literacy, with success coaches and other things, is just a really good model that I think we can put together going forward. So implementing all of those things are some of those challenges, and making sure we're getting it right.
Yeah, I know we drafted different policies looking out across the country for different things to kind of see what was out there. I mean, we kind of do it in our own way, if you will, in Arizona, in terms of how that looks. But I appreciate that. I mean, have you received much feedback from other directors or other places around the country on this?
Not too much. I've had a couple of calls from other states and other places, interested in how we're implementing this. I think our staff actually have as well. And so I think we are starting to get questions, and I assume that that's probably going to increase as well. I think more of it's been from just here in Arizona, from foster parents and others just being curious about how this law is going to work going forward. That's why I think it's going to be important for us to do our own sort of webinars or town hall type events to make sure that we're informing the community and making sure that everybody is aware of how this will work going forward.
So one last question, because we are getting questions that I know we want to get to, but I do just overarching, what do you believe everyone on this panel, child welfare advocates and policymakers, need to know from you to make progress on addressing this issue of preserving youth benefits? What do they need to know? Big picture, Anne.
Whoa, I mean, I think they need to know if their state is moving in this direction. They really need to be involved early on and have input on how it's implemented, because as some of the questions have indicated, there's some real bumps in the road that some of the states have run into. And if it's not well thought out, for instance, your question about what really is unmet need, if that isn't really thought out in a way that has the voice from the youth as to what they consider to be unmet need, if the agency just decides what's unmet need, we may not make any progress at all, right? Because the agency might look at what they feel is the need of the child and pay themselves for providing what they otherwise should be providing, regardless of the child's benefit. So I think it's important to get in early in the process of developing the policies, so that you're not after the fact trying to correct policies that are not well informed by the people they affect, the children they affect, and their families.
That's solid. Yeah. Drew.
I would just say, first of all, I believe all of us that are part of this panel, I'll at least speak for myself. We're willing to be a resource to others who are looking at this issue. And one of the things that I'm proud of in Arizona is that we do have a really comprehensive reform. There have been efforts in other places to attack different parts of this problem. Some states or jurisdictions have looked at the notice and due process problem and making sure there's notice of a benefits capture when it happens. There are other states that have focused more on stopping the practice in general. What we've done in Arizona is comprehensive. We're focused on the notice issue. We're focused on stopping the practice. And we're also focused on, having the Department of Child Safety really do a meaningful look at the children coming into its care And as Anne discussed earlier, a continuous evaluation of their needs and their eligibility for benefits. And, I think the thing to understand that is underlying all this and the challenges that Director Luan is leading to overcome right now, and that Anne was mentioned, when you go around the country, you see different problems they've run into, is there really is a revenue maximization industrial complex that's been built up over the last 4 decades around benefits money. There are private enterprises that have worked with state agencies and Social Security to normalize this practice. And it's ingrained in the Social Security Administration. It's ingrained in child protection agencies around the country, and there's an industry around it. And so anytime you try to reform a system that is working that way, that's frankly been designed to work the way that it does, you're going to run into unwinding all of these machineries that have been built up over the years. And so we're going to be working to overcome those challenges here in Arizona, but that's really what folks need to be aware of. There's been great public reporting about this and scholarly research, and we're all resources for all of you who are looking at different aspects of this.
Thank you for that. Why don't we go ahead and Director Lujan, when you last thought? What do they need to know?
What do they need to know? I guess I'm going to put on my old hat from when I worked at CAA, which is an advocacy organization, in terms of what you need to know to pass this legislation. I think it's people telling their story, like we heard from Marissa earlier. I think as lawmakers hear why these benefits can make such a huge difference in the lives of children who are in the foster care system, I think that helps to make the case for itself among lawmakers to gain that support. So I think it's getting those personal stories out to legislators to let them know what a significant difference this kind of policy change can make.
All right, centering impacted communities. So go ahead, be dropping your questions in. We've already got a few. I think Marissa is going to be joining back in the panel as we ask these questions. So any questions for Marissa, feel free to drop those in as well. All right, question 1. And this may be, I'm going to go with Anne. Well, yeah, let's start with Anne. How do you deal with pushback from agencies and legislature saying we need to support all foster youth?
I saw that question. I guess I was puzzled because I have heard, the funds are necessary for the agency to be able to serve all youth. So why should some youth be treated specially? Which is very interesting to me. But I think the answer is these children are entitled to these services. And if they were not in the custody of the state, they would be receiving them, and they would be able to, their families would be able to use them for their benefit. And children going into foster care should not be treated worse than they would be if they were living with their families. But it's kind of an interesting twist to why shouldn't we treat all foster kids worse? I mean, I don't know how to really completely respond, but it's an odd way to think about it. Because a child whose parent has died or who has a disability should not be funding the child welfare system. The citizens of the state of Arizona or Massachusetts should be funding their child welfare system, not the children that have been taken into care.
Anyone else have any perspective they want to share on that question?
I was just going to add on to what Anne said, but she kind of said it there at the end. I agree with what she said. I think these benefits belong to the youth, and this funding should be coming from the legislature as they fund our agency to fund our operations to support all. So it's coming from the general fund rather than just benefits that are designated towards particular children to help fund our operations.
And I'll just jump in and sort of share the inverse perspective, which is under the federal and state constitutions that we honor here in Arizona, there is a duty for the state to respect and enforce the Equal Protection Clause. And one of the claims that has come up in some litigation around the country and is under advisement presently at the Alaska Supreme Court is the fact that this process does not treat these children the same as others. No other children are in a category where they're required to give up their property without even knowing about it to pay for their own care. And so there is an equal protection problem, but it may be different than the way the question was posed.
Context. Second question. Have any of you had any success or maybe heard about instances where successful challenges have been brought to recoup the funds already taken from children? If so, can you speak about that? I'm going to pivot to Trude since you brought up Alaska.
And go ahead. I saw you come on.
You know, I haven't, so I was just going to say I haven't, and I'd love to hear if other folks have.
And I'm not aware either of at least a litigation challenge that's resulted in that, but that's been what's at stake in the cases that have raised different challenges to this. I don't believe that the federal appellate courts have dealt with the due process and equal protection issues. The main cases that have been heard dealt with the anti-attachment provisions of the Social Security Act and basically said that those provisions didn't bar capturing the funds. So, but the constitutional challenges, that case in Alaska, which is under advisement right now, has both due process and equal protection claims. And it's been under advisement with the court for over 6 months.
And I know sometimes in the not in the court system, but in the policy space, that there's been conversations about in terms of crafting model reforms, if it should take into account kind of like past practice. That is not a feature to clarify for our audience of the Arizona reform, and that's not one we necessarily are advancing for a number of different reasons. It's really perspective is what we're talking about here. Okay, so kind of lengthy question here, but as some of you know, Marissa knows because she testified on it, pending bill, Massachusetts, and separately making progress somewhat administratively. There seems to be this issue. I mean, it's like some states want to try to do this thing administratively, which I think has some real significant limitations, and then others also doing it statutorily, which I think is also, you know, if not done thoughtfully, can miss the mark as well. Anyway, with ending the practice of the goal there is to end the practice of Social Security benefits for foster care youth instead of conserving them. 2 questions. Have you run into any issues with the agency as a representative payee trying to set up ABLE accounts and account to Social Security Administration for the benefit use? And I think there's 2 parts, so I'm going to ask that question to the director. Any issue there?
Can you repeat that again?
Sure. Any issue with the Child Welfare Agency, DCS, as representative payee trying to set up ABLE accounts and account to the Social Security Administration?
I have not heard of any issues yet. Again, this is pretty new, but I have not heard of any issues as of yet.
And have you seen the Social Security Administration impose in-kind income reductions in youth benefits because the state agency is no longer taking a fee for care for their SSI benefits? It's a little technical there, but
yeah, no, that's haven't heard anything of that. I know our staff is actually meeting with the SSI administration this afternoon, so maybe after that we'll hear something. But no, I have not heard anything yet.
That issue. All right, anyone else?
Yeah, just that we posed that issue to the administrator at David's agency, and he said they'd not run into it, but they were meeting with Social Security and they would bring it up with Social Security in their meeting. So hopefully we might not get it resolved, but we'll know at least what Social Security's thinking is sometime today.
And answer questions from the federal government abound, right? But we do have, it seems like a lot of people actually are asking this question, and because we just talked about it, why did we choose the type of accounts we did? And there's also been, seems to be this curiosity around a cap of kind of, I think what they're going to is like unmet needs, requests for expenditures above $2,000. I don't know, Director, do you want to speak on that first?
Yes, and I wasn't too much in the weeds of how these decisions came about, and we might have gotten some of this from Anne and Drew and others in terms of the feedback, how we set it up. But we are setting up two different types of accounts. We have a personal needs account, and then we have what are called ABLE accounts. The personal needs accounts, the benefits will go in and up to the $2,000 cap. And then once they hit that, then if they have the ABLE account, the excess can go into there. And I think that was set up partially designed to address that cap issue. But we have those two different accounts, both of them managed by this third-party vendor initially, and then whether that changes, going forward, we'll see. But that's my limited understanding of part of why we set up those two different accounts is that $2,000 cap issue, because then the funds could be shifted to the other account.
Yeah, and I know Anne kind of weighed in on that. Before we kind of dive into that, I have a question for Marissa about this. Do you have concerns about foster youth rather, being able to access their money?
Yeah, a little bit. Because my speech was mainly about what happened to me after care. But I did receive benefits while I was in DCF custody, which I didn't learn until after I was 18. And DCF only came to me when that money was at a cap of $2,000 to spend that money down. They never came, monthly at that 10% to allow me to spend that 10%. They only came when the account was going to go over $2,000. And it was basically a spend down on a bunch of things that I didn't need, iPads, iPods, like things like that. I don't know how they're looking to fix that, because, you guys are still looking at PCA accounts, but I didn't get to use that money in the way that I should have been able to do it. I didn't get to use extracurricular activities, trips. I didn't use it for any of that stuff. So I currently haven't had any children that have come into my care that have gotten Social Security benefits, but I do know that it is still very hard to get the department to pay for stuff financially. The kids are allotted money, and the money that they're allotted for like birthdays and things, DCF still gives us a hard time about that money. So I don't know what the plan for that is, but I do think it could potentially still be a problem getting access to that money for those kids.
That's a good point. And I know Anne, I think, has some thoughts specific to this, because I know we discussed it quite a bit, and we're getting a lot of questions on account types. But Anne, this whole unmet needs cost of care process piece.
Yeah, one of the things we were concerned about was the statute basically makes it clear that the department cannot take the child's money to pay for the cost of the child's care. But then what can it spend the money for? And so because the department has sort of a wide range of sometimes special accounts that fund certain things, it's a real interesting dance. And I think it's one where you really have to listen to the kids, ask them what it is they need in general categories. And we did that. We met with some advocates in the community that work with kids that are like 16 and older, and the list of the things that those kids need that this money could go to went on for pages. So we did look at Oregon's definition of what unmet need was, and then what the money could be spent for. We used that in our proposal to the department. And we tried it. You don't want to make a list that says the department can't ever spend money for X, but you also don't want to limit what the child's identified need could be. And the key is for the team that works with the child to be regularly talking about what their long-term plans are and their short-term plans, and using the money to financially support both the short and the long term. So like Marissa was saying, some of it is extracurricular activities, which you might need access to that right away, right? I want to join the soccer team and I need to have all of this, and I need to have it by Monday because that's when the coach said. But then the longer term, like I need to get my license, so I want to do driving school, or I may need to get a car and I need to make payments. How am I going to do some of the short and the long term? And you can't put all of that in policy, sort of in an exhaustive way. But if you have a process by which you regularly are sitting down with the child and working through with them what their goals are, it makes a lot more sense. And I think on the question of what the various kinds of accounts are. I think we're still learning. I mean, we took guidance from a lot of folks about how do you protect a child on SSI from losing their benefits because their savings account goes over 2,000, and the ABLE account is sort of the one that comes to mind, but there may be other ways to do it. We had the department consulted with one of the sort of very experienced probate and trust attorneys here in town that sets that up for kids who aren't in foster care. So I think that may be something we continue to learn about, but it's required by the statute that they set up these accounts that in order to preserve the child's eligibility. So that's the measure of whether the account meets that standard. And then as new law and new options, new vehicles come up, the department could expand what kind of accounts they use.
There's a question. Can we talk about the thought about balancing the structure of policies to incentivize conserving funds until case closure versus ensuring funds are accessible? I mean, you talked about that in unmet needs. Director, I'm sure with your team, you probably explored those conversations.
Yeah, and I think, and I think as Anne mentioned, like, I think we still have a lot to learn in terms of how we implement this stuff. And given that the law was just signed this last summer, a lot of what we're doing now is figuring out how do we just implement it in the best possible way so that it's the most effective. I think but then as we begin to implement, then we start to look at kind of what this question is asking. How do we really maximize the benefits for the benefit of the youth? How do we adopt or transform our policies so that we're really working to incentivize being able to conserve those funds to maximize for the benefit of the youth? What are the things that we can be doing as a staff to best practices going forward? I don't know that we're necessarily there yet. I think we're looking at that, but right now we're just trying to get the law implemented. And I think as we really start to implement these things, I think there's a lot of things we can look at about, as I mentioned earlier, for how do we maximize the ability to kids who qualify for disability benefits? How do we make sure that we are doing everything we can here to make sure that, get to that 20% or whatever the mark is that Anne said is that we should be striving for? How do we do those kinds of things? So I think those will be some of the next steps that we'll take, is how do we do it even more effectively than what we're doing now.
Can I add something on that?
Absolutely, yeah.
I think, like you said, that the big part of this is really getting this enacted, but I don't think that this is going to be something that's going to, once it's enacted, it's going to be happy and everyone's going to be satisfied. As we see, the department has the ability to find ways around rules and read the small print to work in their favor. So I do think there's going to be a lot of that. A lot of, this child wants to play basketball, let's take from their personal needs account, although the state gets funding for extracurricular activities for children. So I don't think it's just going to be, let's get this law enacted and let's move on. I think it's, let's get this law enacted and make sure we're holding the department accountable and making sure these kids are really getting to use this money for their best, their best lives, their best interests, their future. I think for me, I am a little curious on how they're gonna, how you guys are looking to enact like the ABLES accounts or the long-term investments accounts, and how much of that money is going to be put aside for kids for long-term use. Because I, as a child at 14, 15 years old, was not thinking about long-term investments. And so who are we going to put in charge of that for kids? Is that, guardian ad litems? Is that, attorneys? Is that workers? I am a little curious about that. But otherwise, I feel like there's been a lot of movement on this recently. And so I know I'm a panelist, but I'd like to really say thank you to the people that are working on this, because, little Marissa really, really appreciates this.
Your passion for this issue is what's very motivating, Marissa. And so I just, again, so grateful for your perspective on and thoughtfulness about all of these issues. There is a question about what happens. I mean, you kind of asked it, like, what happens at the end, or when is the end? Like, does the money go with them when they go back home, when they turn 18? Drew, Director Lujan, anyone, what happens?
Well, the vision that's set out in the statute, and I mean the statute's effective right now. It took effect on October 30th. And the vision of this law is that youth who are exiting care will potentially have a savings to help them in their educational endeavors, in their housing endeavors, beginning a life and having some security and stability financially. But also, to the point Marissa just made, while youth are in care, there shouldn't be a large bureaucratic exercise to get funds to celebrate a birthday or to do the things that are important in the lives and for the health and well-being of the youth in the departments. So the goal, though, is to provide that kind of security and stability and have that to start a life after exiting the department's care.
Yeah,
One-
that's right.
One other thing I'd say too, for, 'cause I saw the question for youth that are not aging out of the foster care system that are under 18. My understanding of what happens is if they have funds in an account, once they exit care with us, that account goes back under the control of SSA, but then they identify who is that youth, that child's administrator of those funds going forward until they turn 18. So I think it shifts back to SSA and then they sort of coordinate the transfer from there, is my understanding.
Right, I do think this is a policy practice issue that is difficult, partly because what you really need is proactive thinking so that before the child leaves care, there has been identified who will be the representative payee if the department has been the payee in the past. For some of these children, their relatives will be the representative payee and the account may be managed and in that relative's name. So there won't necessarily need to be a whole lot of banking done. But if the department is the payee, that's a difficult transition if it isn't planned for. So part of what the statute requires is an aggressive action on the department's part to find representative payees other than the department. And that solves a lot of these transition issues. And to some degree, it may solve some of the questions that Marissa had about as a 14-year-old, how am I going to spend my money? If your aunt is the payee and you've got a good relationship with your aunt, you sit down with her and you think about those things. And she may just say to you, no, I'm not going to let you use your money for this like aunts might do. But if the department is the payee, then you have all the issues Marissa pointed out, which is the instinct is to be overprotective and overconservative and not necessarily bring the youth into the discussion, because that makes it complicated when somebody is sitting across the table from you and says, this is how I want to spend my money, right? So it's a new role for the department, I think.
Yeah.
Really.
But kids matter and people matter, and listening to them is so important. And I'm so grateful for the people on this panel who do listen and care so much for kids in our community. I'm grateful for you, Marissa, for just being you and being awesome and being bold. And I would say to those who are listening, stay tuned. The center is introducing legislation across the country. We have boots on the ground to advance this in other states. We'll get done what Washington can't get done. And we also have a preservation toolkit. We're happy to accelerate and connect with you in your state. If you're not getting movement from legislators there, we're happy to be a resource for you. So stay tuned. There'll be a survey that will pop up. Take it. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're grateful for you. Thanks.